The wedding cook had spent 6 weeks preparing another woman's perfect day, so why did the groom stop her at the kitchen door and whisper 2 words that made her afraid to leave? A glass struck wood inside the crowded ranch house as Abigail clutched her wrapped knives and cast-iron skillet. Ethan stood before her in his wedding clothes, voices swelling beyond the door. She stepped toward the dusty road. He leaned closer. "Wait for me." What was he about to do? "Tell me where you're watching from." The letter from Walker Ranch arrived on a Tuesday in late April, folded twice inside a cream envelope that looked too fine for Abigail Carter's kitchen table. She almost set it aside. Rain had worked through the tin above the back bedroom again. A bucket sat beneath the leak, catching one patient drop after another. Outside, 40 acres of Wyoming ground waited for spring, along with fence posts that needed replacing and a mortgage payment Abigail had been counting toward nickel by nickel. Daniel had left her the land 6 years earlier. Keeping it had become her promise to him and to herself. The letter offered $40 for 6 weeks of work. Ethan Walker was marrying Charlotte Beaumont on July 14th. More than 200 guests were expected at Walker Ranch, and the family wanted an experienced cook to prepare the entire wedding feast. Abigail read the amount twice. $40 could secure the payment hanging over the farm and leave enough to buy tin for the worst part of the roof. By lamplight that evening, she wrote her acceptance. On May 1st, Abigail reached Walker Ranch in a borrowed wagon with her knives wrapped in flour cloth, her mother's cast-iron skillet packed beneath a blanket, and 2 dresses hanging from a nail behind the seat. The ranch spread beneath low Wyoming hills, broad enough that its eastern fences disappeared into morning haze. Cowboys were already working near the corrals, leather creaked. A hammer rang against a gate hinge. Somewhere beyond the barns, cattle bawled as men pushed them toward water. The kitchen was larger than Abigail expected. 2 wood-burning stoves, a stone hearth, a long-scarred work table, shelves deep enough for flour, sugar, preserves, and crockery. Beneath the floor lay a cold cellar smelling of earth and old brine. Abigail stood there alone for a moment. Then she touched the handle of her mother's skillet. This she understood. The door opened behind her. Charlotte Beaumont entered first, tall and carefully dressed, followed by her mother, Eleanor. Charlotte looked around the kitchen before allowing her eyes to settle on Abigail. "You're Mrs. Carter?" "Yes, ma'am." "I was told your cooking is reliable." Abigail folded her hands over her apron. "You'll get what you paid for." Eleanor's eyebrow moved slightly. Charlotte walked to the work table. "There is one condition I prefer to make plain. During the celebration, you will remain here. Guests will have no reason to enter the kitchen, and you will have no reason to enter the rooms where they are gathered." Abigail waited. Charlotte continued. "The wedding will include families from Cheyenne, Laramie, and St. Louis. I want the service handled quietly." Eleanor adjusted one glove. "Good household work," she said. "His work guests never have to notice." Abigail understood perfectly. They wanted her hands. They did not want her presence. She thought of the bucket beneath her leaking roof. "All right." Charlotte gave a small nod and left with her mother. Abigail waited until their footsteps disappeared. Then she tied her apron tighter. For the next several days, the kitchen became a world of its own. She inspected hams for smoking, counted sacks of flour against delivery receipts, tested the ovens for uneven heat, and began jars of preserves for the wedding table. Before sunrise came bread. After supper came pastry experiments. At night, Abigail sat beneath an oil lamp sketching the 4-tier cake Charlotte wanted. Her own design was simpler than the St. Louis fashions Charlotte admired. Climbing roses, sweet peas. Nothing pretending to be more delicate than it really was. By the second week, Abigail knew the kitchen by sound. She knew which stove door dragged when hot, which floorboard complained near the cellar, and when the ranch hands were driving cattle past the north fence without needing to look outside. Then one morning, just before 5, the back door opened. Abigail looked up from a bowl of bread dough. A man stood in the doorway, wearing dusty boots, a faded work shirt, and a coat carrying the cold of the pre-dawn range. His dark hair showed the first trace of silver at the temples. He stopped when he saw her. "Morning. Morning." His gaze moved toward the coffee pot. "Mind if I get a cup?" Abigail wiped flour from one hand. "It's your kitchen." Something almost like amusement touched his face. "My house, maybe. Looks to me like you're running the kitchen." He poured the coffee himself. Then he held out his hand. "Ethan Walker." Abigail looked at it before taking it. "So, Abigail Carter." So this was the groom. He sat at the far end of the work table and drank without asking questions that were none of his business. No questions about Daniel. None about why she lived alone. None about whether 40 acres were too much for a woman to manage. He simply let the quiet remain quiet. 20 minutes later, he carried his cup to the wash basin. "Much obliged, Mrs. Carter." The next morning he returned, and the morning after that. Soon he began asking questions. Why did she put vinegar into pie dough? Why did she turn bread from the pan and knock against the bottom before deciding it was finished? Abigail answered despite herself. "My mother taught me the bread. And the pies? My grandmother." Ethan rested both hands around his coffee cup. "She cooked professionally?" "No, she cooked because people needed feeding. Came west with recipes mostly in her head." Abigail pressed the dough beneath her palms. "She used to say people could taste whether you cared while making something." Ethan considered that longer than she expected. "I think she was right." Most people would have laughed. He didn't. That unsettled Abigail more than laughter would have. One morning, Ethan found her cake sketches lying near his usual place. Abigail reached for them. He touched only the corner of one page. "This yours?" She followed his finger. 4 tears, climbing roses, sweet peas curling upward along the sides. "Yes." He studied it. "Charlotte wants something grander. She wants something taller. That isn't the same thing? Not in a kitchen." A quiet smile appeared. Then he looked at the drawing again. "Don't change it." Abigail stopped. Ethan tapped the edge of the paper once. "That one's perfect the way it is." He finished his coffee, pulled on his gloves, and walked toward the back door. "Morning, Mrs. Carter." The door shut behind him. Outside, a horse snorted near the hitching rail. Somewhere across the ranch, a cowboy called to another man through the pale morning light. Abigail remained where she was. Her palms rested flat against the flour-dusted work table. She had come to Walker Ranch for $40. She had come to save Daniel's land, repair a leaking roof, cook one wedding feast, and return home. Nothing about that arrangement was complicated. It could not become complicated. But Abigail looked down at the little climbing roses Ethan had noticed among all those pages. Then she looked toward the door through which another woman's future husband had just disappeared. For the first time since arriving at Walker Ranch, the kitchen no longer felt entirely safe. Not because Ethan Walker had done anything wrong. That was the trouble. He came back the next morning exactly as before. Boots carrying gray dust from the north pasture, shirt sleeves rolled once at the forearms, hat pushed back just enough to show where the wind had flattened his hair. He poured coffee. Abigail worked biscuit dough beneath her palms. Neither mentioned the sketch. For several minutes, the only sounds were the scrape of the rolling pin, the low pop of the stove, and cattle shifting somewhere beyond the corrals. Then Ethan said, "Your grandmother really crossed all the way from Kentucky?" Abigail glanced up. "In a wagon. Took longer than she ever admitted. Must have been hard." She didn't talk much about the hard parts. What did she talk about? Abigail dusted flour from her fingers. Who needed feeding? Which family ran out of salt? Who got sick? Which child wouldn't eat unless she put molasses in the cornmeal? Ethan smiled faintly. Sounds like she remembered people before she remembered Miles. Abigail looked at him then. Yes. He turned his cup slowly. My mother was like that. His voice changed when he spoke of her. Not softer exactly, less guarded. She could walk into a bunkhouse full of men fighting over cards and have them sitting down to supper 10 minutes later. Abigail smiled despite herself. I would have liked her. Ethan looked straight at her. She'd have liked you. The words settled between them. Abigail lowered her eyes to the dough. Ethan did not seem to notice what he had done, which somehow made it worse. He finished his coffee and left. For the rest of the day, Abigail found reasons to stay busy. She reduced stock twice, recounted sugar, checked the cellar jars against her own written list, even though she knew the number already. That night, on the narrow cot behind the pantry, she lay awake listening to coyotes call somewhere beyond the eastern ridge. Ethan had thousands of acres. She had 40 and a roof that leaked. He had Charlotte Beaumont. She had 6 years of widowhood and a mortgage receipt folded into the drawer beside her bedroll. Those were facts. Facts were useful. Feelings were not. By the end of the 3rd week, Charlotte had begun appearing in the kitchen more often. She inspected preserves, questioned serving order, and watched Abigail's work with the strained patience of someone trying to find fault where there was little to find. Then one afternoon, she arrived carrying a lithographed cake design from St. Louis. 6 narrow tiers rose on spun sugar columns, decorated with glass-like drops that looked delicate enough to break under a hard breath. I want this effect, Charlotte said. Abigail studied the page. In July? Charlotte's eyes cooled. The wedding is in July. The sugar won't hold in that heat. Not at that height. Then control the heat. Abigail kept her voice even. I can control an oven. I can control icing. I cannot control Wyoming in July. Charlotte took one step closer. You're being paid to solve problems, Mrs. Carter. I am. Then solve this one. Abigail laid the drawing flat. If I build that exactly as shown, it may lean before the first slice is cut. I can give you the same elegance with 4 tiers and stronger supports. Charlotte's mouth tightened. Do you understand what you are in this house? The words were quiet. That made them worse. Abigail felt heat rise beneath her collar, but her hands stayed still. I'm the woman responsible for making sure 200 people remember your wedding feast for the rest of their lives. Charlotte stared at her. That is what I am. The silence stretched. Then Charlotte took the drawing and left without another word. Abigail waited until the door shut. Only then did she breathe out. A voice came from the back porch. She had no right to speak to you like that. Abigail turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, hat in one hand. How much did you hear? Enough. His jaw was tight. I'll speak to her. No. He looked at Abigail. She crossed a line. And I need this job. That doesn't make what she did right. No. But if you confront her because of me, I'm the one who'll pay for it first. He went still. Abigail saw him understand, slowly, reluctantly. All right, he said. Then he stepped farther into the kitchen. But I want you to hear something. Abigail said nothing. This room is yours while you're running it. The work is yours. The food is yours. His eyes held hers. And you are not invisible in this house. Not to me. For 1 second, Abigail forgot the stove behind her. Forgot the invoice on the table. Forgot Charlotte. Then Ethan put on his hat and left. That night, Abigail slept badly. 2 days later, she heard voices through the corridor wall. Charlotte first. You spend more time in that kitchen than you do with me. I drink coffee there. With her. A pause. She's working. I'm not a fool, Ethan. Abigail stopped, with both hands around a bowl. Charlotte's voice lowered. She is a poor widow from a failing farm. She is here to cook, stay out of sight, and leave when the work is done. Silence. Then Ethan answered, "Don't speak about her that way again." No shouting, no threat, just a line placed firmly in the ground. Footsteps followed. A door closed. Abigail stood alone with the bowl in her hands until the gravy inside began to skin over. The next morning, Ethan came in at 5. He poured coffee. Abigail kneaded bread. For a while, neither spoke. Then he said, "You heard us." She did not look up. "I wasn't trying to." "I know." Another silence. "I'm sorry. You don't owe me an apology." "Maybe not." Abigail pressed the dough forward with the heel of her hand. "I need this job, Mr. Walker." "I know. I need it to stay simple." Ethan looked down at his coffee. For several seconds, the kitchen held nothing but the stove ticking as it warmed. Then he lifted his eyes. Simple. One word. Quiet, careful, and completely unconvincing. Abigail turned back to the bread. Outside, the first light touched the Wyoming hills, pale and clean above the pasture. Inside, neither of them said another word. They did not need to. Something had already crossed the room between them, and both of them knew there was no putting it back where it had been. For the next several days, they became more careful. Ethan still came at 5. Abigail still poured coffee. But the easy questions about bread and pastry gave way to longer stretches of quiet. He would come in smelling of leather, dust, and cool morning air, sit at the far end of the work table, and keep his eyes on the window while she rolled dough or checked stock. Neither crossed the line they had named. That did not make the line disappear. It was May who brought the next trouble into the kitchen. She had worked at Walker Ranch 15 years and carried herself with the calm of a woman who noticed more than she repeated. One evening, after the hands had finished supper and the house had gone still, she came in carrying 2 empty preserve jars. Instead of leaving them on the shelf, she sat down. "You've seen the men coming from the east?" Abigail nodded. 3 visitors had arrived that week in dark coats, too clean for ranch work. They spent their afternoons behind Ethan's study door with Charlotte's father and left before supper. May wrapped her hands around the coffee Abigail set down. "They're railroad people, or close enough to it." Abigail stopped wiping the counter. The line they're talking about would come through the eastern grazing acres. She knew those acres. From the kitchen window, she could see the beginning of them beyond the cottonwoods. Green longer than the rest of the range even as June heat hardened the western ground. "That's Ethan's best pasture." May looked at her. "Yes." The rest came slowly. Charlotte's father had promised investment money after the marriage, new cattle, better winter feed storage, repairs to the south barns. In return, Ethan was expected to grant a railroad right-of-way across the eastern range. "They call it part of the family agreement," May said. Abigail looked toward the dark window. "What does Ethan call it?" May's mouth tightened. "That depends who's asking." The following morning, Ethan arrived before she had finished the first pot of coffee. There was mud dried along one boot and a crease between his brows that had not been there the week before. Abigail poured his cup. He sat. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said, "You don't have to tell me anything." "I know. But if you need to say something out loud, I can listen." Ethan stared into the coffee. "My father built this ranch around the eastern grass." He paused. "Holds water longer. Gives us 3 more weeks of good grazing most summers." Abigail set down the rolling pin. "Charlotte says the railroad money would make up for it." "And what do you say?" His thumb moved once along the rim of the cup. "I say land remembers what you do to it." Abigail understood that immediately. Her 40 acres were not rich. They had no railroad value. No Eastern investors would ever sit in a study discussing them. But Daniel had repaired the north fence with his own hands. Abigail had planted beans along the southern edge after he died. She knew where water settled after a storm, and which corner of the field froze first. "Charlotte calls it just land," Ethan said. Abigail looked at him. "Is it?" His eyes lifted to hers. "No." One word. Nothing more was needed. After a moment, Ethan leaned back. "My father used to say the worst decisions a man makes are the ones he makes just to keep from disappointing somebody." Abigail folded the cloth over the dough. "He sounds like a man who learned that lesson the expensive way." He did. Maybe that's why he remembered it. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. The kitchen felt smaller after that. Not because he had moved closer, because something between them had. Charlotte noticed. Her friends began arriving from St. Louis in the last week of June, bringing hatboxes, trunks, ribbons, perfume, and voices that carried through the back porch. One afternoon, Abigail was lifting a supply crate from the cellar when she heard Charlotte laughing outside. "She's capable," Charlotte was saying. "I'll give her that." Another woman answered, "And Ethan spends every morning in there?" A pause. "For coffee." The word was made to sound foolish. Then Charlotte added, "She has very little else. A struggling farm, no prospects to speak of. Work is what women like that have." The women laughed softly. Abigail stood in the cellar doorway with the crate against her hip. She did not step out. She did not answer. She carried the crate inside, set it down, and waited until the voices moved away. Then she looked at the rows of preserves, the hams hanging ready, the flour barrels, the cake sketches pinned above the work table. She made herself a promise. The feast would be perfect. Not for Charlotte, not for Ethan, not for anyone who might praise the meal and never ask who made it. It would be perfect because Abigail Carter had made it. July came hot. The ranch changed by the day. Canvas shades went up along the yard. Extra hitching rails were built near the cottonwoods. Cattle were moved farther south so bawling herds would not disturb the ceremony. Fiddlers rehearsed on the porch in the evenings, while wagons delivered wine, ice packed in sawdust, imported sugar, linen, china, and boxes marked with St. Louis merchant stamps. By July 13th, Abigail had slept less than 4 hours in 2 days. She finished the cake shortly before dawn. 4 ivory tears, climbing roses, sweet peas, nothing false in it, nothing built to impress at the cost of standing upright. She was still placing the last flower when Charlotte entered. Already dressed for the morning preparations, she stopped in front of the cake. For once, she said nothing immediately. Her eyes moved from the bottom tier to the top. "It's beautiful." Abigail looked at her. "Thank you, ma'am." The honesty remained in Charlotte's face only a second. Then it closed. "Service begins at noon. The toasts will follow the meal. The vows are at 4. Abigail nodded. Charlotte turned to go. "Miss Beaumont." She stopped. Abigail kept one hand beside the cake. "I hope today is everything you want it to be." Something passed across Charlotte's face. Then she straightened. "Do your job, Mrs. Carter." She left. By 10 that morning, wagons were rolling through the Walker gates one after another. Ranchers from Laramie, families from Cheyenne, railroad men in polished boots, women in summer dresses lifting their hems from the dust. From the kitchen window, Abigail could see only fragments of them. She did not need more. At 4 o'clock, Ethan Walker would stand beneath the cottonwoods and marry Charlotte Beaumont. Until then, Abigail would feed every person who came to watch it happen. She turned from the window, tied her apron tighter, and reached for the carving knife. Outside, the fiddle struck its first bright note. Inside, Abigail began sending another woman's wedding feast through the closed door. The first platters went out just after noon. Smoked ham glazed with apple and brown sugar. Biscuits wrapped in white cloth to hold the heat. Green beans cooked with onion and salt pork. Potatoes browned in cast iron until the edges went crisp. May carried the first dishes through with two young ranch hands. She came back smiling despite herself. "They're asking who made the ham." Abigail kept carving. "Tell them to eat it before it gets cold." An hour later, May returned with empty serving bowls. "Woman from Cheyenne wants to know who baked the rolls." Abigail reached for another pan. "And Mr. Holt from Laramie says he hasn't eaten ham that good in 30 years. "Then Mr. Holt has had an unfortunate 30 years. May laughed once. Abigail did not. She could hear the banquet beyond the wall now. Chairs scraping, glasses touching, voices rising and falling in the warm July air. Somewhere among them sat Ethan, dressed for vows that would be spoken beneath the cottonwoods at 4. Abigail did not let herself picture him. The cake went out shortly after 2. May and both ranch hands carried it slowly, one careful step at a time. When the kitchen door shut behind them, Abigail finally sat. Her feet ached, her shoulders burned, her hands smelled of sugar, smoke, and flour. For 6 weeks she had built this day. Now there was nothing left to do but hear it happen. A toast began in the banquet room. Charlotte's father spoke first. His voice carried through the wall in broad, confident phrases about family, prosperity, and a future that would reach beyond Red Willow. The railroad men applauded hardest. Then Charlotte stood. Abigail recognized the change in the room before she heard her speak. Conversation settled. Glasses stopped moving. "I've been asked all afternoon," Charlotte said brightly, "who deserves credit for this remarkable meal." Abigail's hands went still. A few guests murmured. Charlotte continued. "We hired a local woman to execute the preparations. She works hard, and I suppose that deserves acknowledgement." A small laugh passed through the room. "But the menu, presentation, and standard were arranged under my direction. I simply made certain she understood what was expected." Abigail stared at the cold stove. Then Charlotte went farther. "She's the sort who does best with clear instructions. A kitchen widow with more persistence than polish." More laughter. Charlotte's voice sharpened beneath the sweetness. "She is rather heavy, rather plain, and fortunately quite content to remain where the work is." The room answered with another ripple of laughter. Not everyone. Abigail could hear that too. Some silence had entered beneath it, but laughter was what reached her. May came through the door almost immediately. "Abigail, don't." May stopped. Abigail stood. She untied her apron, folded it once. Then she wrapped her knives, lifted her mother's skillet from its hook, and gathered the small bundle she had brought 6 weeks earlier. "You're leaving?" "Yes." "You don't have to leave like this." Abigail looked at her. "I do." The back door opened. Ethan stood there. He had changed from ranch clothes into a dark coat and white shirt. A silver watch chain crossed his vest. His boots had been polished. For one terrible second, Abigail saw exactly what she had spent 6 weeks refusing to imagine. The man she loved, dressed to marry someone else. His eyes dropped to the knife roll. "You're leaving." "My work is finished." "Abigail, congratulations, Mr. Walker." His jaw tightened. "What she said in there was wrong. That is between you and her. She took your work and made a joke out of you." Abigail's grip tightened on the skillet handle. "I agreed to be hidden. I did not expect kindness with the arrangement." "That doesn't make it right." "No." She moved toward the door. "Go back, Ethan." It was the first time she had used his name to his face. He stopped breathing for half a second. Then he said, "I can't." Abigail looked at him. "The vows are in less than 2 hours." "I know." "You have 200 people waiting." "I know that too." His voice remained low, but something underneath it had broken loose. I cannot walk out there and make that promise pretending I don't know what I know. Abigail shook her head. No. He frowned. No what? You do not get to make me the reason you leave her. I'm not. If this marriage is wrong, then it was wrong before I walked into your kitchen. If that land bargain is wrong, it was wrong before I rolled the first biscuit. Ethan said nothing. Abigail stepped closer. If you walk away today, you do it because you know who you are, not because I'm standing here. The words landed. He looked toward the corridor leading back to the banquet, then at Abigail. For once, he had no answer ready. She reached for the door. His voice stopped her. Wait for me. Abigail turned. He had moved close enough that the noise beyond the wall seemed far away. For what? Ethan swallowed. For me to do what I should have done before you ever came here. He did not touch her, did not ask her to stay in the kitchen, did not promise what came afterward. That restraint nearly undid her. Abigail opened the door. She walked past the barns and toward the road with her knives under one arm and the skillet held against her side. The July wind lifted dust along the fence. Behind her, the ranch went on humming with wedding noise. Then it stopped. Not slowly, all at once. Abigail halted near the cottonwoods. Through the open banquet windows came Ethan's voice. Charlotte. One name. 200 people went silent. Abigail closed her eyes. Inside the hall, Ethan stood beside the table where the Beaumont family had arranged themselves like people already certain of the future. Charlotte stared at him. What is this? Ethan looked first at her, then at the guests. I'm not going through with the vows. Someone gasped. Charlotte's father pushed back his chair. Ethan kept speaking. I have spent months calling obligation integrity because it was easier than admitting the difference. Charlotte's face went white. This is because of her. No. The word came fast. This is because of me. He looked toward the railroad men. And because I will not trade the eastern acres to make this marriage useful to your father. Charlotte's father rose. We had an agreement. We had discussions. You'll hear from my lawyer. I expect I will. A glass struck the table hard enough to break. Voices rose. Chairs moved. The wedding ended before anyone reached the cottonwoods. Abigail had started walking again when she heard May behind her. Abigail! May came down the road faster than dignity usually allowed. He stopped it. Abigail turned. What? The wedding, the vows, all of it. For several seconds, Abigail said nothing. Then May caught her arm. He's asking for you. Abigail looked back toward Walker Ranch. I'm not going into that hall. Not the hall. May's expression softened. The kitchen. Abigail returned. Ethan was there with his coat off and his sleeves rolled, both hands braced on the work table. He looked up when she entered. You came back. May is difficult to refuse. Something almost like relief crossed his face. Before either could say more, the door opened again. Charlotte entered. Her hair had loosened around her temples. The calm society smile was gone. She looked at Ethan, then Abigail. Of course, Ethan straightened. Charlotte, don't. She looked at Abigail. You knew, Abigail answered carefully. I suspected he was unhappy. And you said nothing. It wasn't mine to say. Charlotte stared at her for a long moment. Then something in her anger shifted. You never tried to take him from me. No. Charlotte gave one short laugh that held no humor. That almost makes it worse. Silence settled. Then she looked toward the empty cake stand visible through the corridor. What you made today was extraordinary. Abigail did not speak. Charlotte's mouth tightened. The things I said were not true. She forced the next words out one at a time. I knew that while I was saying them. It was not an apology large enough to repair the afternoon, but it was truth. Charlotte turned to Ethan. My father will make the railroad matter unpleasant. I know. You'll lose the investment. I know that too. She nodded once, then left. A wagon was already being brought around for the Beaumont family. Abigail looked at Ethan. You didn't do this for me. No. His answer was immediate. I should have done it before you ever had to hear any of that. She believed him. That was what made leaving harder. Abigail picked up her knives. My roof is still leaking. Ethan looked at her. I know. I need to go home. He did not ask her to stay, did not follow her into the yard. He simply stood beside the work table as she walked out. For 11 days afterward, Ethan Walker did not come down the road to Abigail Carter's 40 acres. And Abigail, who had once feared he might choose another woman, discovered that waiting after he had chosen no one at all was somehow harder. She worked. That was what she knew. On the third morning, she climbed onto the roof before sunrise with a hammer, roofing nails, and a sheet of new tin bought from Heller's store in Red Willow. The July heat had not yet settled over the fields. Dew darkened the grass around the house, and meadowlarks called from the fence posts while Abigail pulled the damaged metal free and fitted the new sheet into place. Part of the Walker money had gone directly toward the mortgage note. The rest bought tin, nails, flour, and enough lamp oil to carry her through August. She finished near noon. That evening, rain came down from the western hills. Abigail stood in the back bedroom and watched the old bucket beneath the leak. Nothing fell into it. Not one drop. She carried the bucket outside and turned it upside down beside the woodpile. Then she went inside and made bread. That was when Ethan became hardest not to think about. 5 a.m, a warm coffee pot, dust on his boots. A man sitting at the far end of her work table asking why bread sounded hollow when it was ready. Abigail pushed the memory away and worked the dough harder than necessary. May arrived on the 11th day. Her wagon came over the rise carrying a sack of flour, preserved peaches, coffee, and a smoked pork shoulder. I didn't come because Ethan sent me, she said before Abigail had finished tying the horse. I didn't ask. You were about to. Abigail almost smiled. They sat at the kitchen table. May took a folded paper from her reticule and slid it across the wood. Mr. Holt from Laramie. The gray-bearded man. The one who ate enough ham for 3 men. Abigail opened the paper. Mr. Holt was hosting a Cattlemen's Association dinner in September. 60 guests. He wanted Abigail Carter to cook it. The amount written beneath the request made her read it twice. That's 3 times what Walker Ranch paid. Yes. How did he get my name? I gave it to him. Abigail looked up. May lifted one shoulder. He asked who cooked the food. I decided the truth was overdue. Abigail folded the paper carefully. May watched her. The wedding story is traveling, but so is your food. Outside, a gust moved through the cottonwoods. Abigail said, And Ethan? May's face remained still. He hasn't asked me to bring you back. That hurt more than Abigail expected. Then May continued. He hasn't asked me anything. He gets up before daylight, works the eastern range, eats supper, goes over accounts, and drinks coffee alone in the kitchen every morning. Abigail looked toward the stove. He's waiting? In the only decent way a man can, without making you responsible for it. That evening, after May left, Abigail wrote 2 letters. One accepted Mr. Holt's dinner. The other took longer. She finally wrote, I believe I left something in your kitchen. I'd like to come by Thursday morning if that's all right. A. Carter. Thursday came cool for July. Abigail reached Walker Ranch at 5 exactly. The back door was unlocked. The kitchen looked almost unchanged. A coffee pot rested on the stove. 1 cup stood beside it. A folded note lay on the work table. Abigail opened it. I looked for what you left. Couldn't find it. Maybe you can tell me. E.W. The back door opened. Ethan entered wearing work clothes, dust on his boots and his hat in one hand. He stopped. Morning. Morning. Neither moved for a moment. Then Ethan came to the table. I owe you the truth. You don't owe me anything. I do. His hands settled against the wood. I knew the engagement was wrong before you arrived. I knew the land agreement was becoming something I didn't want. I kept telling myself staying was honorable because leaving would disappoint too many people. He looked at her. Then every morning I came in here and this was the only hour of my day that didn't feel arranged. Abigail's fingers tightened around the note. What are you asking me? Nothing you have to answer today. He paused. I'm telling you where I stand. And where is that? Ethan drew one slow breath. In a kitchen at 5 a.m, hoping the woman I respect might let me know the rest of her life. Abigail looked down. I'm afraid. I know. I have spent too long being useful to people who did not choose me. Ethan did not rush to answer. When he did, his voice was quiet. I can't undo that. His eyes stayed on hers. I can only show you what I choose now. The silence between them was steady, not empty. Abigail finally said, I took another job. Something changed in his face. Cooking? 60 cattlemen in Laramie, September. Holt? She nodded. Ethan smiled then. A real one. He'll tell everyone from here to Montana if the food is good. It will be. I know. He began asking about ovens, serving space, wagon loads, and whether Holt had enough cold storage. Not once did he ask whether she planned to stop working. Abigail watched him for a while. Then she touched the coffee pot. The coffee is still warm. Ethan understood. He sat. Late summer carried them slowly forward. Ethan rode to Abigail's farm, but never repaired a gate without asking first. Abigail rode with him across the eastern acres and saw the grass he had refused to trade away. He helped haul flour and crockery to Laramie in September, then stayed out of Abigail's kitchen while she ran it. Mr. Holt's dinner succeeded. By the following week, 2 more letters arrived asking for Abigail Carter by name. 3 weeks after that first Thursday morning, Ethan stayed late after helping rehang the south gate. They ate supper on Abigail's porch. The Wyoming sky faded from gold to blue. Neither seemed willing to stand. Finally, Ethan looked at her. Abigail. She knew from his voice. I'd like to build a life with you. Not over yours. Not instead of yours. He paused. With you. Abigail looked across the 40 acres she had fought to keep, then back at him. Yes. They married in October. No railroad men. No 200 guests. No closed kitchen door. May stood near the porch, crying openly. Neighbors gathered beside the newly straightened south gate. Abigail wore her best blue dress, and beneath it, tied where no one could see, was her mother's apron. Ethan took her hand. The minister finished. Then Ethan leaned close enough that only Abigail could hear him. She'd have liked you very much. Abigail knew exactly who he meant. She looked at the farmhouse with its repaired roof, at the land Daniel had left her, at the road stretching north toward Walker Ranch, at Ethan beside her. Months earlier, strangers had eaten her finest work while she stood hidden behind a kitchen door. Now her name traveled with her cooking. Her land remained hers, and the cowboy holding her hand had never asked her to become smaller so she could fit inside his life. They stood together beneath the enormous Wyoming sky, on ground neither of them had been willing to surrender. And between those 2 pieces of land, they began building the road home. Maybe that is what stayed with Abigail most in the years that followed. Ethan had not come into her life to rescue her from the woman she had been. He had simply seen her clearly enough to love the woman who was already there. And perhaps you know something about that kind of waiting. Maybe you have spent years being useful, dependable, strong for everyone around you, while quietly wondering whether anyone would ever notice the heart beneath all that strength. Maybe you have carried disappointment so long that hope itself began to feel dangerous. Abigail's story reminds us that love worthy of keeping does not ask us to disappear. It does not demand that we surrender the ground we fought to hold. Real love makes room. It listens. It waits. And sometimes, after grief has convinced us that one chapter was the whole story, life opens another door when we least expect it. If you were standing in Abigail's place, would you have gone back to that kitchen? Tell me in the comments. And if stories about courage, healing, second chances, and unexpected love have a place in your heart, you're warmly invited to subscribe. There are more journeys waiting beyond the next ridge, some mysterious, some heartbreaking, and some that may leave a little light behind long after the story ends.